Hello, this is Adam House. Welcome to week 9 of my undergraduate course diary of Resisting Fascism and Global History, a college course that I'm taking in the fall semester of 2025. I want to reiterate, since it's been a while since week 1 when I talked about this. This is not me reteaching my Resisting Fascism and Global History class from the university, not trying to play the role of my professor. This is about me reflecting on the week's lessons and the course lessons, and kind of organizing my own thoughts and verbalizing or trying to articulate as I put these things together in my own head and kind of sort them out. And so this is a diary mostly for my own benefit, but I am making it public. So once again, if you get something out of it, great. If not, it doesn't hurt my feelings because it's really not for you anyway. So anyway, with that said, I hope you do get something out of it if you decide to watch. All right, so week 9 of Resisting Fascism and Global History, we're talking about uh, Jewish resistance, especially during World War II, um, and especially, of course, against the Third Reich, against the final solution of the Nazi regime, which was obviously their effort to, the Nazis' effort to exterminate the Jews. This was spoken about or written about in Adolf Hitler's book that he wrote called Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggles. Um, the book talked about a hierarchy of races with the Aryans, or white people, basically at the top, and they sought to racialize the Jewish religion and put that race slash religion of Jewish people at the bottom. So they considered Jews to be subhuman. They often use terminology such as vermin or rats, and cockroaches, and all kinds of other um, uh, just bad, nasty language, and slurs to refer to Jewish people. This was common further than just the Nazis themselves. Anti Semitism in Europe was, I mean, it goes back for many centuries, at least back to early Christianity, and efforts to try to discourage Christians from associating with Jews. And so there's a long history of anti-Semitism in Christian Europe, and this kind of came to a boiling point during the German Third Reich, and in its in culminated in this effort by the Nazi regime to actually focus on trying to exterminate what they saw as the Jewish race. So, all right. So, without getting too far into the weeds on that, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about actual Jewish resistance to this fascist movement, to this fascist final solution plan. Um, First, before I forget, I want to mention that there is a very good documentary, a recent documentary, that talks about this. It's a PBS documentary entitled Resistance, They Fought Back. And this is a documentary from this year, being 2025, I believe, was released in January, if I remember correctly. So within the last year, this is a film about Jewish resistance, and an important film. I actually did watch this one, and it's a very good documentary. It's very well done, and there's a lot of great information in it. Another reference from our class that I highly recommend. I think it's worth you checking out. Even if you just have kind of a tentative interest in World War II history or Jewish studies or Holocaust studies, or anti-fascist studies. If you're interested in any of these things at all, I think this documentary would be right up your alley. So any history buff, I think, would appreciate how good the documentary is. So anyway, let's talk about Jewish resistance a little bit. I don't expect to spend a lot of time on this today. Should be a fairly short video this time, but that is no comment on Jewish resistance. There was plenty of it. Now, I'm a little bit older, so I definitely remember over the course of my life, often hearing the refrain of, why didn't the Jews resist? Or why didn't the Jews fight back? Or at least, why didn't they fight back more than they did, or resist more than they did during the German campaign to exterminate them? And I have a few answers to that, but first I want to kind of dispel that as a little bit of a myth. When we look back at any of this kind of stuff in history, it's always kind of difficult to gauge just how proportional something is within context. And so the proportion of Jewish resistance is kind of problematic in itself, because there are some very good records of Jewish resistance, but then there's also some gaps in the historical record. There's also, as big an event as World War II was, it's very easy for other elements of politics and the war and the other things that were going on during that time period to kind of overshadow any one kind of smaller element within that greater historical context. So I think there may be some element here in the general historical memory. I think there may be some element here of the fact that there actually was Jewish resistance first and foremost, and it was not nothing. There was significant Jewish resistance, but within the historical record, sometimes you kind of have to look for it a little bit. And so I do think there's an element of just so many big themes around that time period in 20th century Europe, that it's easy for these other events and these other narratives and storylines to kind of overshadow the amount and the effect of Jewish resistance, and the reasons that there was not more than there was. Can we say that there could have or should have been more resistance on the part of the Jews? Maybe, maybe not. They say hindsight's 20/20, but also hindsight kind of comes with its own problems and biases that kind of can obfuscate a little bit the proper historical proportionality, if you want to put it that way. So anyway, as a little bit convoluted as all that might sound, let's talk a little bit about what Jewish resistance looked like. So there was a vulnerability within the Third Reich. Not everything. The Third Reich itself, the Nazi regime, was not a monolith in its integrity, if you want to put it that way. And when I use the word integrity there, I'm talking more about its propensity for kind of following its own rules. And in other words, there was corruption. There was corruption among Nazis and Nazi leadership, just like there was corruption in the Soviet Union. There's corruption in the American government and power structure, just like there's corruption in any government, in any political system, in any hierarchy, in any religious organization or corporation or anything else. And of course, the larger that any institution is, the more opportunity there is just by volume for there to be some kind of corruption. So, this was one of the vulnerabilities of the Nazi regime, is that there was corruption within the Nazi ranks. And so one of the things that we find is that there were Jews who were able to escape persecution, or at least able to escape a particular geography where there might have been an especially harsh crackdown, like within the ghettos, the Jewish ghettos that the Third Reich began to lean on and to herd the Jewish people into. There was corruption that allowed for some Jews to escape those kinds of environments. Jewish people were able to immigrate to other countries, or they were refugees to other countries at least. So, and this is where we begin to see some Jewish people fleeing to the Palestinian area, Jewish people who were fleeing to the United States and other countries around the world, that some of them were able to get to. Now, unfortunately, not nearly as many Jews as wanted to flee or tried to flee were able to actually get out. But the point that I really want to get to here, there's so much more we could say about just even this one dynamic within the historical context. But the point I really want to get to here is that this was one of those areas in which Nazi corruption allowed for some Jewish resistance, and specifically talking about the ability to flee the extermination. And so, one of the things that was discussed in class was, can you even see fleeing the situation as a form of resistance? And sure, there may be some people that say, well, if you're quote unquote running away, then you're not actually resisting. But I think that's a little bit simplistic, especially when you consider the context that the Nazi regime was on an explicit campaign to exterminate the Jews. So, giving those circumstances, my personal opinion is that yes, it is a form of resistance to survive. And to kind of put a fine point on that, we might look at the many instances within this historical context, this time period, where even Jewish mothers parted ways with their small children, babies. They gave them up to other people that they knew would be able to provide, or at least had a very good chance of being able to provide their children and their babies safe passage out of the geographical influence of the Third Reich. And so, people were basically adopting Jewish babies, Jewish children, and getting them out of Europe, getting them out of anywhere where the tentacles of the final solution could reach them. And because the Third Reich was engaged in a campaign to exterminate an entire people, I see a mother giving up her child in hopes that that will save her child's life, and therefore perpetuate the bloodline or perpetuate the race, allow it to continue to exist. I very much see that as a form of resistance. So beyond that, there's a lot of other resistance. The easiest answer to form, if you want to ask what were the forms of resistance, the easiest answer is to say, somebody who picks up arms, who picks up a gun and shoots at other people. That's kind of the easy answer of what does resistance look like. There were definitely instances of Jewish people forming these kind of. It's difficult sometimes to even call them militias because they were not even that organized. Sometimes it was literally just a family, a household family, or a couple of people a Jewish people in a village, that got together and decided, hey, the 2, 3, 4, 5 of us are going to form our own little combative squad, kind of a guerrilla militia to fight against Nazis wherever and whenever we can find them. Jews who went out and basically hid in the woods and tried to live off the land and carry out whatever kind of missions they could to throw a monkey wrench into anything that the Nazis were doing. So, and this happened. This happened quite a bit actually. So. Then there's also the Warsaw Ghetto. That may be the biggest, most remembered historical example of Jewish resistance during World War II and during the Third Reich. The resistance in Warsaw Ghetto was significant. It actually, someone pointed out that the resistance of the Warsaw Ghetto lasted longer than the French government. When the Nazis began to invade other countries, and when they began to move west and take over the Western European countries, France surrendered. Infamously, France surrendered pretty quick. And so, if you want to look at it in those terms, that's one way that you could say it, is that the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw uprising lasted longer than the French government and their military put up a fight against Hitler's Third Reich. So, so it was not insignificant, and there were many other ways in which Jews resisted, and this is key. This is a very important part of this, because again, the easy answer when you ask what does resistance look like, the easy answer is to say, it looks like picking up a gun and shooting at the enemy, putting your life on the line under fire, being shot at. And that's not the only form of resistance. In fact, some people might say that that's hopefully a last resort of resistance, and hopefully the last thing that you would turn to as a way of resisting. And so I think there's something to be said, and in anti-fascist history, there's very much a theme there of the idea that, if we use our words to resist fascism early and often, then maybe we won't have to escalate to the next level. And if it does escalate to the next level, then maybe if we use sticks and rocks to resist fascism, then maybe we won't have to use bullets. But then if we have to use bullets to resist fascism, then maybe we won't have to use, bombs and grenades and things like that. But then if we're forced into a position where we have to use bombs to resist fascism, maybe we won't have to escalate to the point where we use tanks and fighter jets and big bombs, and things like that to resist fascism. So there's always kind of this ladder or stair step of escalation that we're seeking to avoid, and hoping that our resistance to fascism can be kept down here on the least destructive level as possible, to nip it in the bud before it does escalate to the point where there's so much mass chaos and disorder and bloodshed and pain and suffering on the part of everybody, not just involved, but everybody around it in the environment as well. So, okay, so the Oneg Shabbat archives, I wanted to mention that, and this is something I believe that is also mentioned in the PBS documentary that I mentioned about resistance. They fought back. And so as we talk about the types of resistance, I feel like those who ask why the Jews did not resist enough are overlooking the nuances of the whole situation. It seems to me that Jews resisted about the best that they could with what they had to work with and in the circumstances they were dealt. So some of the things that contributed to a lack of resistance were things like disinformation and misinformation. Joseph Goebbels, one of the propaganda minister, one of Hitler's right hand men for many years. He headed up this propaganda campaign, and so propaganda was a major piece of the Third Reich. It was a major piece of the Nazis' rise to power, as well as a major element of their regime when they were in power. And so they were constantly engaged in a campaign of trying to trick the Jews, to lull the Jews into a sense of security is maybe a little strong, kind of going too far, but that's the general idea. Is they at least wanted the Jews not to be alarmed, to the point that they would fight back. They wanted the Jews to believe that, hey, what we're doing to you is not really that bad, or what is happening is something that you can live with, or maybe more accurately to kind of demonstrate this is things like telling the Jews, hey, if you will voluntarily get on this train that will take you to a camp where you can work, a camp where there is more food and shelter and resources available to you, so you can live a little more comfortable life than you're living right now in this ghetto where there's nothing but starvation and disease and people dying left and right. We can give you a piece of bread and maybe a little marmalade, and you voluntarily get on the train. We'll take you to the work camps, and there you will be given a lifestyle of, yes, you'll be involved in forced labor, but you'll also have a place, maybe a warm place to sleep, maybe food to eat every day, and maybe even get to stay with your family, and husbands, wives, children not be divided and separated from each other. And of course, then when Jews would accept this and they would take the bread, and you got to think, also these people are starving. An average adult diet is supposed to be somewhere around 2,000 calories, and off the top of my head, it was something like less than 200 calories a day that a lot of these people were getting, if anything, a lot of days going completely without food. So, when you're in those kinds of starvation conditions, a loaf of bread, or even three loaves of bread and a jar of marmalade, and the promise of a work camp where you'll have a place to sleep and a place to warm up at night, and food to eat every day, and you'll still get to see your family and things like this. That's maybe a pretty effective way to get people to voluntarily get on the trains and go to the work camps. Of course, when they got to the work camps, that was a whole other ball game, and that was part of the Nazi disinformation. Because once they got to the work camps, they found out that, well, actually, in the work camps, it's very possible and even very likely that you will be divided from your family, and that um, you will not get to eat very much, if at all, every day, and where you get to sleep may in fact not have warmth. You may freeze through the night, and you're still in destitute conditions where disease is rampant. There's a lot of dysentery and other disease going on, and people dying all the time, and then there were those who were told this lie by the Nazis that they were going to the work camps, and in fact they were going to death camps. And so when they got off the train, they had their belongings with them because they thought they were going to a work camp where they were going to be able to live in this new lifestyle. And so they brought some belongings with them. They might even have a suitcase with them. They may try to bring, small pieces of their previous life with them, books, jewelry, various articles, items of clothing, and keepsakes and things like this, and pictures, albums, and stuff like that. And then when they get to the camps, they're stripped of everything. And some of them to the extreme that they were literally stripped of every thread of clothing on their body, and then herded like cattle with a whole bunch of other people who were naked, other Jews who were naked, and herded into the chambers where the gas was released, and they died in a room packed with other naked Jews who had been lied to. All of them had been lied to. So, again, this is one of the elements of how the Nazis were able to get as many Jewish people as they were to basically march to their own death, their own destruction, and their own extermination. Now, there's other things going on here too. There's these other kind of psychological elements, and one of these elements is collective punishment. And collective punishment, now I don't mean to, this comparison, I don't want to carry it too far because I know it's a totally different situation and a totally different kind of thing, but just to demonstrate the point of collective punishment, I'm a United States Army combat veteran myself. I've been through basic training and AIT and my unit training and downrange and Afghanistan and all that, and lived on post, lived in outposts downrange and whatnot, and so I've lived the military lifestyle, and I know one of the things that happens within the military, and you very much get introduced to it during basic training, is the idea of collective punishment. And, it's very effective to, when you're training new soldiers, to say, if you decide that you're going to do something that's against the rules, something as small as, you're going to lay in bed after everybody else has been told to get up and get ready for PT, for physical training. If you lay in bed when everybody else is up making their beds and trying to get their PT uniform on to go out and run 5 miles or whatever it is, um, you know, the consequences for that behavior, for that nonconformity, will not only be that you will be in trouble, but it very well may be that everybody around you, all of your peers, all of the other trainees that you're with, will suffer as well for your actions. And, one of the last things that you want to do is to be seen as that guy, right? You don't want to be that guy, the one that caused everybody to have to run an extra 5 miles that day, or the one that caused everybody to have to skip a meal that day, or you don't want to be the one that everybody else sees as responsible for, why you had to skip a mail call and wait another day or two to get your letters from home, and or a much needed 5 minute phone call home, and it's been 2-3 weeks since you've talked to the love of your life, and that kind of thing. So conformity can very easily and very effectively be forced by utilizing collective punishment. Now, again, I don't want anybody to misunderstand the comparison. I know it's a totally different thing. I'm just trying to demonstrate the point that, when it came to Jewish resistance, like within the ghettos during the Third Reich, if you had two Jews who stood up together and decided to fight back against a Nazi soldier, not only would that ultimately end up bad for those two Jews who stood up and fought, but then the Nazis would engage in reprisal against many or all of the Jewish people in that ghetto. And so that one event where one or two or three Jews decided to stand up and fight back would result in 2,000 Jews being rounded up and shot in the head, or marched to a trench and just killed and put in a mass grave. So that's quite a bit of incentive to conform. And especially when you're talking about an environment that includes all age ranges, males, females, babies, children, elderly people, disabled people, the vulnerable, the weak, and just a complete cross section of society of all different types of people, demographics of people. So this is quite a bit of incentive to go along with the program, and to just hope and pray and do everything that you can to try to be one of the people that maybe is able to escape it, or maybe you're able to look for an opportunity to help your children escape it, or another loved one, somebody that you care about. You're looking for an opportunity to help them escape it. So it's very much using even people's love against them. It's a difficult topic to even touch, right? So, but this is what happened, and this is one of the reasons that resistance to fascism is so important, because this type of thing has happened many times throughout world history, and fascism is just one of those manifestations of this type of man's inhumanity towards fellow mankind. All right, so a few other things, ways in which the Jews resisted. Some Jewish people living in the death camps, now they didn't have a lot of resources, so sometimes it was impossible to even get things like pencils and paper and things like this. But for those who could and were willing and able to, there were people who kept journals in the death camps. This is a form of resistance. For one thing, as scarce as resources and supplies were, to use those resources for that purpose shows how important it was to them. And of course, if you were caught doing something like that, it was death. It was a death sentence. You were literally taking your life into your hands, just by doing something like trying to keep a journal of the Nazi atrocities in the death camps or in the work camps. Um, so, in the Jewish ghettos, there were people who tried to keep documents, tried to procure Nazi documents and keep those documents, or generate their own documentation of what was going on in the ghettos, and then find ways to hide that and to keep it preserved for posterity's sake. I mentioned mothers who gave away their children in order that their lives could be preserved and their bloodline would go on, their race, their religion would go on. Um, there were many Jews who took their own lives into their hands by smuggling food and weapons and even books. Within the Jewish ghettos, this is goes back to the idea that they didn't want, the Nazis didn't want the Jews to read in a lot of areas at a lot of times. So they were even forbidden to have books. And so there were literally underground libraries that were constructed by Jewish resistors. Um, and there were a few Jewish people who took it upon themselves to write propaganda against the Nazis and to call for resistance against the Nazis, to try to publish leaflets for mass dissemination, asking their fellow Jewish people to rise up and to fight back. This did happen at least a few times. Um, Jews made homemade bombs, and when they didn't have the supplies, the ones who were in the ghettos who wanted to resist but didn't really have weapons or other supplies by which to resist, then they had to become creative. They had to figure out other ways. If maybe they could put a few things together to make a homemade bomb. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they had to figure out other ways to resist, and so they would do things like sabotage railroad tracks where they knew the Nazis had important cargo coming back and forth, or to sabotage communications infrastructure. And this is significant. Coming again from my background in the military and from being deployed as a soldier in combat. I know that it is of paramount importance to be able to establish and maintain and rely upon your communications and transportation infrastructure. Logistics is one of the most important pieces of conducting war, and of maintaining power and authority over a geographical area or population of people. So, for Jewish resistors to engage in these acts of sabotage was infinitely important. Um, and couriers became a major piece of Jewish resistance. There's all these little Jewish ghettos that are being established around Europe, and basically communications between and among those ghettos was cut off. The Nazis didn't want the Jewish populations in these ghettos to be able to communicate with each other. And so Jewish couriers who would find holes or ways to escape the ghetto would make their way out of the ghetto, that sneak out of the ghetto and carry sensitive information to Jewish resistors in another ghetto. So these couriers, if they had been caught at any point during this process of escaping one ghetto or trying to find their way into another, basically breaking into another ghetto, or anywhere along the way in between, if they had been caught, they would have been killed for it. Especially if they had been found to be carrying any kind of important or sensitive information. So couriers, there were a lot of couriers, and they were very important. And then they, also there were Jews who engaged in forging documents and procuring other types of supplies, stealing supplies from the Nazis. And a lot of this was things like, just trying to get food for the children and things like that. So anyway, so the point is here that if you ever hear somebody say, why didn't the Jews resist the Nazi final solution, the Holocaust? Why didn't the Jews resist the Holocaust during World War II? First of all, they did resist. So this is kind of a fascist talking point to kind of play up the idea of the passive Jewish people, and that they, somehow were not up to the task, or not able to answer the call to resistance. That in itself is a mythology. The Jews actually did resist, and what they did was not nothing. There was significant resistance. Resistance came in many different forms. It looked like a lot of different things, up to and including things like just trying to preserve their own religion, their own culture, their own heritage, and having secret religious gatherings and things like this, trying to celebrate Jewish holidays on the down low, under the radar of the Nazis picking up on what they were trying to do, because they were certainly not allowed to be doing those kinds of things under Nazi rule. So, but the Jews were engaged in all of these acts of resistance, and good on them. Good on them. I am not Jewish. I cannot speak for Jewish people. I cannot say that I in any way know what it would be like, or would have been like for those people at that time. But what I can say is that studying history helps us to gain a certain respect for all different types of people throughout history. And I'm glad that I have studied a little bit and become more familiar with the history of Jewish resistance, and have a lot of respect for the Jews basically doing the best they could with what they had in the worst of circumstances, to resist the Nazi regime, to resist the Holocaust, to resist the final solution, to resist the evils and horrors of the Third Reich. So, good on the Jews, and good on all of the resistors who have resisted fascism throughout history. And that will conclude my Week 9 diary entry of my undergraduate course in Resisting Fascism and Global History. As always, fuck Trump, fuck ICE,